This weekend, Winnipeg welcomed back an old friend to Canada Life Center, our good pal Patrik Laine. Unfortunately for him, he went scoreless, and the Jets came away with a 4-2 victory. Find out how on tonight's episode of Locked On.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, we're going to be chatting about a lot, but first off, we're kicking it off with some thoughts on Winnipeg versus Montreal, a game that always, for one reason or another, whether Montreal is good or bad, gives the Jets fits. This team, the Habs, just seemingly have Winnipeg's number, and it doesn't even matter if Montreal is good in a given season. It's just like somehow this team just never really seems to quit and always gives the Jets fits. And this year, Montreal is firmly in the bad camp. So coming into this game, the expectation was a big Jets victory. And it was a victory, but it was probably a little closer than Winnipeg would have liked. We'll chat about why in just a brief moment. But before we go any further, wanted to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Now, like I said, the Jets came into Montreal needing a bit of a bigger victory, right? You know, the game against Vegas didn't exactly go super well, and sometimes you just have to beat up on an easier opponent to make yourself feel a little bit better and get that confidence back. Now, Montreal, despite having a bad record, I think, you know, the past couple of games that they've played in, you look at the score lines and, oof, yeah, if you're a Habs fan, it's not been good timing for y'all. Recently, you know, Montreal lost 9-2 last week. You know, there was a 4-2 loss to the Caps in there. And, you know, they did sandwich a couple of victories in there. They beat the Islanders, the Preds, and the Ducks. But, you know, there was also a 6-3 loss to Boston. And if there's one team that Montreal just hates losing to, it's got to be Boston. Obviously, Toronto is certainly up there. But if there's, you know, a rivalry that really just leaves a sour taste in the mouth if they drop a result, it's got to be losing to the Bruins. Hey, we all know that after having just lost to Vegas yet again, a team that you'd never really think would be your rival, but somehow, you know, that's exactly what's happened to the Jets. It never feels good. And so I think, you know, coming into this game, Montreal was extra motivated and pissed off, and they gave the Jets hell. It was a lot closer in the actual run of play from what I was seeing than I expected. I thought Montreal's counters were quick. Down low, they were a real pest. And so the Jets really needed Connor Hellebuyck to be at his best. And oh boy, was he. That jaw-dropping save against Patrik Laine on the power play, Hellebuyck himself said he didn't even really have time to even see it. He just tried to naturally push across because he knew the shot was coming, and somehow he said he flailed around, but he made an unbelievable save after Laine had actually been potting quite a few goals from there recently. So what a save. The Jets power play for their turn did a great job. Couple of goals. You had Lowry on the doorstep, and then Kyle Connor squeezing one through later. And then, you know, the Lowry line also chipped in a goal. Now, you do notice that I've put in a note about asking less of the Lowry line, and I know that they scored in this game, but recently I think that there's been a trend where they've not been so good. They may have potted one in this game, but I think it was probably for, you know, with respect to their line against the run of play. They are having a tough time keeping up, and I want to talk a little bit later about why. But for this game, you know, I think the biggest thing for the Jets was coming away with a victory, taking care of business on home ice, and, you know, not really having any injuries or anything that stood out in a negative way. And I think for the most part, the Jets took care of business. It wasn't like a Picasso, which Paul Maurice was always, I think, famous for saying. But by the same token, you know, I did hope that the Jets would maybe put up a little bit more of an impressive performance, but you can't really complain about a win. I think for the most part, The Jets just needed to play as clean a game as possible. They did for the most part. Aside from a Josh Anderson and a Lane Hudson goal, Hudson scored his first NHL goal, and just seems like the Jets always have at least one game, or in Winnipeg's case, more than one game over the past couple of years where they give up some sort of milestone goal. It actually does happen to everyone, so I'm just being nitpicky, but it is kind of funny that for some reason Winnipeg seems cursed to give these up. But otherwise, the Jets, I think, played a fine enough game. It wasn't like crazy, but it was enough to where it got the job done. And the good news for the Jets this week is that their next couple of opponents, yeah, they're not exactly, world beaters. You've got a Sharks and Duck State, for the away games. And then Winnipeg comes back for a huge matchup against the Minnesota Wild on the weekend. So I think it was really important for the Jets to close out this homestand with a positive note. The couple of games that they've played at home, a little bit mixed. There was that rough performance against Columbus, which, in fairness, the Jets were coming on the back end of a consecutive night of games, so I don't want to give them too much crap over that. I think the bigger concern was the Golden Knights game. That's where the Jets, again, were kind of little broed and were sort of reminded of where they are in comparison to teams that quite seriously have real playoff ambitions. And I know that people will look at Vegas's record and say, well, they're not as good. But if you actually watch the way that they play, and you also remember that they are Stanley Cup champions recently, you probably want to revise that statement a bit. That's a team that's really been there before, and I think it's important for the Jets to try and at least get up to that level, right? But, of course, in between, you had a huge win against the Bruins and, a nice quality win here against the Habs. And so, things are all right. The Jets are still 22-9-1. Things are feeling pretty good overall. Winnipeg has had some fun little roster selections for external tournaments. Braden Yeager's going to the World Juniors for Canada. And we have, of course, a couple of players going to that Four Nations face-off in mid-February, which we'll chat about later this episode. But if we're taking away something from this game, for me, I think the biggest thing is that the Jets still have trouble creating at 5v5 and that they're still asking a lot of Hellebuyck. Hellebuyck truly is, he's just doing stuff that I didn't really think was possible for a Jets goalie, let alone most goaltenders, period. Last year, he had a career season where he saved the most above expectation he ever has, and it was by like a huge volume. Somehow he's doing even better this season. It just seems like the older he gets, he somehow ages like a fine wine. The closest thing I can think of with respect to his performance is really like Henrik Lundqvist. Unfortunately for Lundy, he never did win a Stanley Cup, and Helly is probably locking in his third Vezina, which is more than most goalies could ever even dream of. Once he retires, and I know Garrett Hole said this on Twitter, I've said it, half jokingly but pretty seriously, that when Helly retires, you'd better be building that statue outside of Canada Life. He truly is one of one, and there is a chance that for as long as I live, he may be the best Winnipeg Jet that I watch in my lifetime. He is truly a spectacular talent, one of the greatest goalies of all time. The only thing that he is missing is a ring, and I'm really hoping that sometime in the next year or two that changes. Obviously, that is quite a hurdle. That's a lot to ask, and it's not necessarily all on his shoulders. But, no pressure. We'll just have to see if he can end up getting the Jets all the way to the promised land and finally break what has been a little bit of a curse for him in the playoffs. But in the meantime, of course, I did mention that the Lowry line has maybe not been as good recently. And I want to chat about some potential reasons why that's been the case, and maybe if Winnipeg is being a little bit unfair in how they use them. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But before we go any further, I did want to let you know about our friends and partners at Gametime. Gametime is focused on togetherness this holiday season, and that means you can bring together at live events, whether it's a hockey game or a concert, whatever it is, it's always better shared together. And Gametime wants to help you get there faster with great deals on tickets that make the perfect gift. And they always come back with their lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and so much more. Gametime also knows that it really sucks when you get hit with lots of surprise fees and stuff, so they have an option that you can specifically toggle on to see all-in pricing up front. And they even have a brand new feature called Gametime Picks that helps getting tickets to live events even easier by filtering out all of the fluff and showing you only incredible deals on great seats. Even better, you can even see seat views from where you're trying to purchase tickets from, you're in a hockey rink, having the best seat in the house is really important. I always like sitting up high, and I know it's the nosebleeds, but in terms of actually seeing everything, it's great if I want to track the game. And Gametime will show you exactly just how good that view is from way up high when you pick a ticket with Gametime. So if you want to take the guesswork out of buying tickets, go with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're chatting a little bit about some of the recent downturn in form for the Winnipeg Jets third line. It is often hailed as the best third line in the NHL, and I think that that's not an unfair description. I think that that's reasonably accurate with some caveats. The biggest thing for the Jets right now is that the third line is really struggling. And I know it doesn't seem like that necessarily, but I think what's happened with Winnipeg, this team is definitely a little bit depth heavy. And when I say that, I don't mean that they are, providing the bulk of offense, but I think the Jets lean on their depth lines too much, which is strange to say. But typically, when you're using a third line like what the Jets are doing, they're supposed to back cleanup and be sort of the, I guess, how would you describe it? Almost like the end of your lineup, right? And they're supposed to provide some energy. They're supposed to help spell and rest your top lines. But for the Lowry line, Winnipeg really looks at them as really the primary matchup grouping and the one that has to be sort of your breadwinner. And I think for me, it's asking too much of the Lowry line. Earlier at the start of the season, they had a big offensive explosion. They were finishing almost everything. And, I think that maybe set some unrealistic expectations for what they were going to do. Now that they're finally not scoring and looking more like what I expected them to, I think the Jets need to reevaluate what exactly they're asking of this trio. Niederreiter, Lowry, and Appleton are great at winning matchups against depth lines. I think we're starting to see the limits of what they can pull off, though, especially when they're facing off against top-end competition. They will have shifts against them where they'll absolutely win, but I think the bulk of what we're seeing with them is that they're just slowing down. The Lowry line is being asked to do so much of the defensive work, so much of the forechecking, and so much of the grinding in the corners and along the walls, and to win those matchups and really pave the way for everyone else, especially the skill lines. And I feel like, to me, that's a little bit backwards philosophically. I know people will have disagreeing or alternative thoughts to this, but if your top line and your top six aren't the ones creating the bulk of your offensive production and winning those matchups, I just don't really think you're a successful playoff team. And I think that's really what I've been saying for the past couple of weeks now. And really, even before the start of the season, why I was skeptical to some degree of what was going to happen when we saw Connor Scheifele and Velarde together. I know that the record still looks amazing, and, it certainly is. And I think the Jets are a legit good team. But I do have questions, once you get to the playoffs and even maybe in the second half of the season, how much longer is this formula going to work? I continue to think that the third line is going to burn out. I just think the Jets are asking way too much of them. And the Lowry line has been rough for like the past month. I know that they still hit hard. And, obviously in the last game against Montreal, they chipped in a nice goal. But for the most part, what you're noticing with them is that they're not able to dominate shifts like they were earlier at the start of the year. I feel like Lowry is maybe missing more assignments. There have been more turnovers. They just haven't been at the level that you're usually used to with them. And I think that that's really a sign that, the Jets need to start maybe dialing some of the minutes back or dialing some of the matchups back and giving them some support. It's not that I think that they've been awful necessarily, but by the Lowry line standards, nowhere near their usual mark. And this is a line that, again, has usually been one of the toughest in the league, one of the most hard-nosed, hard tackle groups. And for that line to be slowing down really tells you that the Jets have kind of overstayed their welcome in how they're, creating these matchups. And honestly, I sort of wonder if a spark like Shibrakov on the third line might be exactly what they need. Shibrakov, I think, has done a really good job so far in his few NHL games. Finally went pointless in this recent one, but that's okay. The great goal scoring streak had to end at some point. But I think for the broader conversation, the Jets just need to figure out something that's not, your third line paving the way and your skill lines, essentially batting cleanup. That's not how this should be. And I think it's really concerning that the top line and, at times the second line, whoever's on it at any given time, just isn't consistently being the ones to be your top scorers. At least at even strength, right? On the power play, there's no real problem there. But, at even strength, which you're going to be spending the bulk of these games at, the Jets just aren't getting enough. And I think that that's asking too much of the third and fourth lines to carry the slack. And your third line really isn't going to be the one that's going to be finishing loads of chances. I think Lowry's done a great job this year, generally speaking. But if you keep pushing more and more of the offensive responsibility on his shoulders, it's going to lead to bigger problems. And in the playoffs, I think that that's going to be a big issue, especially if your skill lines just aren't really dictating the pace. The Jets should not be a bottom to top kind of team. Your top really should be creating most of your opportunities and winning their matchups. And so far, that's not really been the case the past couple of seasons. And so for the Jets, again, I think I mentioned on another episode a while back about the Jets needing a philosophy change. I still think that's the case. Other people describe it as like a top 9. You can put it under whatever sort of description or label that you want. But Winnipeg just frankly needs to get more from their first 3 lines and make sure that they're actually using them in the way that makes the most sense and really optimizes their usage. I've said before that the Jets are not a team that has loads of game breakers, but they have lots of really good players. And if you actually put them in the right order and put them together with combinations and pairings that make sense, you can get really, really far. You can create lots of offensive pressure. You can keep that pressure rolling, through all 4 lines. I mean, your depth lines have generally been doing really well in their matchups, and so you need to give them some actual goal-scoring support and, winning those matchups on a more consistent basis. Otherwise, you're just kind of papering over what's been a mediocre roster for several years. And I think that that's how the Jets got away with it in the past. And it's maybe not something that shows up as much during the regular season because, A, you're not facing playoff teams every week necessarily. And with Hellebuyck being Hellebuyck, he's able to hide a lot. And that's not to say that the Jets themselves are bad. I would hardly come anywhere close to making such an assertion. This team is good. In fact, they're really good. But it's the details and things that I think are going to become a problem in the playoffs that the Jets have still yet to really nail down. I think that they're in some ways learning, but in some of the biggest moments, some of the largest things that they need to change, as of yet, I just haven't seen enough of it. And for me, I think Winnipeg has generally done well enough and gotten very far with what they've tried to pull together, but how much longer are they going to be able to get away with stuff like this? That I have some reservations about, especially when it comes to the postseason. I think this team has really come away with, a great record. And again, I don't want to sit here and act like the Jets are a bad team because they're not. But I think when you're starting to face playoff caliber opponents like the Jets did during that really bad road trip from hell the other week, it's just not a great sign when the Jets really go 3-7 and just struggle to create much of anything. I think that was probably a fairer reflection of what the team is like right now. But again, if you get away from asking your depth lines to do all of the work and all of the hard carrying for your top 6, it's going to pay dividends down the road. And I think the Jets can also help by making, maybe 1 or 2 trade acquisitions. I think a big center up front will be really, really helpful. Nemesnikov has tried to do his best. He's clearly not a 2C. And Lowry, for his part, probably isn't either on a real contender. I think you can maybe ask him to play with skill. I just don't think you want to make that the norm. I think if you have a more balanced top 9, that would be fantastic. And maybe a Brock Nelson or something, I keep saying his name, could be one key to helping unlock that. But I also don't want it to be a situation where the Jets only make a change by trading for somebody. try some stuff internally, make some swaps. You don't have to line blender it every game, but I feel like with how stale the Jets have been at 5v5 recently, now would be a good time to maybe mess around and see if you can find something that works a little bit better. The great news for the Jets is there's still plenty of time to work on this stuff, and so it's not like it's a pressing emergency, but I think when you have such a big advantage and, upcoming you've got a break in mid-February that'll give you some time off, wouldn't be bad to go into the break with some new line combinations that are just going to give you a bigger output, a little bit more offensive 5v5. Find a way to create more internally before you have to go outside and try and bring in help. Because if you have to rely on that and you still don't address some of the core issues with this roster construction and the way that you're arranging your talent, it's going to be a problem in the postseason. I don't want to call out the top line every episode, but you just need more from that group at 5v5. So, we'll see what happens. But Lowry's line is being asked to do too much. At some point, they've got to slow things down. And I think the Jets are going to have to figure something out that gives them more support. Because right now, they are being asked to be essentially your top matchup line. And I feel like that's not going to go super well long term. But let me know if you agree with that in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. In just a little bit, though, there was a spot of happier news. Some of these announcements were a little bit older, but I haven't gotten a chance to talk about them. I am, of course, referring to what I just mentioned in the Four Nations Face-Off tournament. A couple of Jets are going to be going for Team USA and Team Canada. We'll chat about who made the cut and what I'm expecting from them in just a little bit. But before we go any further, did want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. Obviously, right now, the Vikes are 11-2. It's been a pretty amazing run for them, and you might be really feeling like Darnold and that roster are the truth. And, with a game later this evening at 8 p.m., this is a great opportunity to get in on the action. If you think maybe the Bears have some surprise in store, maybe you're getting one of those hunches, you can be sure to check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you're placing your bets. But if I am you, I would put some money down on the Vikes. Just visit FanDuel.com, though, to get started and join the action right now. You'll begin with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's all at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. While we're at it, I also did want to let you know about our friends and partners at Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That definitely has happened to me. I've used a couple of music streaming and video services, and I've forgotten stuff that I didn't even realize I had two subscriptions of, because maybe I got a special offer one time and maybe another offer popped up, and somehow I ended up spending double for the same thing. But Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down and figure out what I was paying too much for. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything you need together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subs, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. For me, I think it's really important to have goals, and I think that this option is great. A lot of us would love to spend less, I think, and really grow. Whether for some of you it's your retirement. I think in my case, I'm not old enough to retire, but I'd love to have a little bit more extra spending money for vacations, for trips, all that stuff. And Rocket Money is here to help. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's closing thoughts as we're just chatting a little bit about the Four Nations face-off. Obviously, Winnipeg has a couple of representatives going. Going to be a really fun time for the Jets. And our representatives, we've got two for Team USA and one for Canada. you probably know who they are. On the Canadian side, you've got Josh Morrissey, which of course for Scheifele probably feels like a little bit like a snub. But Morrissey, I think, is really the most deserving of all of the Canadian players on the Jets roster. And frankly, he's just been really an underrated, incredible defender the past couple of years. Really, last season, I thought that he should have had more Norris recognition than he did. Morrissey's really been a steadfast servant of this club, and his growth under Bonus to just really unlock his offensive potential was fantastic. If there's, a couple of things that I really credit Bones for doing, aside from some big vibe stuff, he really turned Lowry and Morrissey's careers around, especially, in these latter years for them. Morrissey's getting up there in age, still, relatively at a good late 20s, early 30s kind of situation, but around this point, a lot of players start to decline rapidly. And if anything, Morrissey just seems to generally be getting better as he gets older. So very happy for him. I think he's going to be an absolute beast. And I think once he goes to Team Canada, people are really going to start opening their eyes to what his puck moving and creativity are really like. He can be an absolute monster in possession. And I think Canada really benefits from having his veteran savvy, his real tough 2-on-1 breakups, his vision and passing, and the creativity that he has just allowed to really develop into an elite skill set. And I know that sort of goes back to his junior days, but for several years with the Jets, we just never really saw that. But now, since Bonus basically told him, go have fun and cut loose, he's been a totally different player. It's been a blessing to watch, and really, you couldn't ask for a finer pick. Now, Scheifele will feel like he probably got snubbed, and maybe you could argue that he did. I'm actually fine with that because I think if his wrist hasn't 100% healed by then, that week or two off probably would not be the worst. With Scheifele, I feel like the defensive side of his game has sort of fallen off. A lot of people sort of joke that maybe it was Lowry that was going to get chosen. I'm glad that Adam probably didn't. I think he could also just use the rest, period. But, I'm sure all of these guys would much prefer to represent their countries and go forth. But I think for the Jets, I'm always thinking about, the playoff run and, any sort of extra time off that you can get in between to heal and prepare for the second half of the year is way more valuable just personally. But I know for those guys, repping the national flags is really the highest honor. And hopefully, once the Olympics come around in a couple of years, some of our guys make it. But on the Team USA side, you've got Hellebuyck and Connor. Obviously, these are pretty no-brainer picks. Connor's going to be up front, being one of Team USA's primary goal scorers. And who else in net but Hellebuyck, right? Gibson, I forget if he's the backup. But Helly in net, he's just been truly tremendous. Actually, it might be Ottinger, number 2. But for Helly, he's truly been, clear and above almost every goalie in the league. I always say that he is the best in the NHL. He's certainly one of the greatest American goalies ever, maybe the greatest American goalie ever. He doesn't have loads of competition, but I think in terms of his career and what he's accomplished, what else could you really say about Helly, right? He's been Winnipeg's best goalie ever. He is one of the Hall of Fame favorites at this point. And for Team USA, there's really no one else that they should turn to. Unless he needs a day off or something because of rest issues, he should be in through the whole tournament. And I'm just hoping that he has a really successful run. I know that, these big tournaments are rare opportunities. And hopefully by the time the Olympics also roll around, he's still good enough to start. I think he'll be, though. Yeah, as I said earlier, he just seems to get better with age, and that does not seem to be slowing down. And I guess you could say the same for Connor. He's playing the best hockey of his career. Very funny that the Jets are sending 2 guys with the name of Connor to Team USA, but Kyle has been, tremendous this year, playing like a true top liner. And I know that he certainly scores like that over the years, but this year his actual 5v5 shifts, the two-way play, the transition skating, everything has really been taken up a notch, and you couldn't ask for a better goal scorer to be sending as a representative for Team USA. But let me know if you'll be watching this tournament. I'm a little ambivalent in some ways, but I'll probably tune in. It doesn't hurt to get a little bit of extra fun in between. 4 nations face-off, going to be a fun little knockout tournament, and I'm hoping for, Can't believe I'm saying this, but Team USA to pull it out. But I'm sure a lot of you are going to be rooting for Team Canada. I'm sure we'll be rivals here in a couple of months. But let me know who you're rooting for in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. Tomorrow we will have previews ahead of Winnipeg versus San Jose, and see you then. As always, have a great night, and go Jets go.